In answer to the first question on Egypt, how far would the United States go to prevent further upheaval in Egypt? I think they would go a long way. They always have done. They've not changed their spots. And Egypt has been very critical and remains critical for American strategy in the region. It's the largest state in the region. It has a history, a historical memory, an army, which is currently under the control of the Pentagon, but it needn't be forever. So I think what they will try and do, as I suggested in my speech, is rig a compromise in which the present constitution with a few amendments will be maintained, and the Brotherhood, Muslim Brotherhood, will be allowed to come to power with the backing of the army, and then they will try and control this outfit. There's a risk, of course, that if things carry on as before, and either space is denied to the new movements that have erupted, or the repression continues, or attacks on Coptic churches continue, etc., that things will get out of control. But at the moment, they don't have too many options in the region. And I think that is the game they're playing. The threats to the gains in Tunisia, I think the important thing, the ties between all workers and left movements are extremely important. Goes without saying. But what is very interesting is that these movements triggered each other off. Tunisia triggered off Egypt. Egypt triggered off other movements. So there is already a basis there for creating an Arab-wide organization of like-minded people who learn from each other, who work with each other. This is part of the tradition in the Arab world. Nasserism, Arab communism, Baathism, all these groups which first erupted in that world in the 1940s and 50s, and in the case of the communists in the 1920s, organized on an all-Arab basis. It doesn't mean that the situation was the same in all these countries, but they organized on an all-Arab basis to stress the continuity of the Arab nation. And that is something which I think the new movements and the new groups have to understand and revive. What leverage does the US have on Britain that makes Britain follow their foreign and domestic policies so slavishly? I think the leverage they have is on three levels. Without the backing of the United States, Britain, of course, couldn't play any role at all anyway. And the British ruling elite, ever since the collapse of the British Empire, and more specifically since the 80s and the reunification of Germany, has been totally obsessed with the factor that unless they played ball with the United States and did their bidding, the Americans could always kick them aside and speak directly to Germany. Underlying it, there's a very strong element of that, which is why they continue to behave as the US Trojan horse inside the European Union. And I would sort of, I now actually describe, I was at a big conference in Madrid 6 years ago, which was an off-the-record conference, where they are mostly government people were there from all over Europe. I was invited as a token outsider. And they asked what I thought was the future of Europe, and this was 6 years ago, and I said it's very bleak. And either we have a social Europe, which defends the rights of its people, or a banker's Europe. I said the fact that you've enlarged Europe to such an extent that it's meaningless now and virtually impossible to push through any social policies that are defensible. And I said de Gaulle was right. The minute you allowed Britain in, de Gaulle said we will have the Trojan horse of the United States, which will destroy Europe. And there were people from the British Foreign Office sitting there as I was speaking, going like this. And I said, of course, where de Gaulle was wrong was that he still thought at that time of Britain as a Trojan horse, whereas under Blair it's become a Trojan mule. And I said the answer is to restart from the beginning. Start again. And start with a small core Europe. But I said the problem is you're all now implicated in the financialized system of capitalism, and that is what links you together. Some of you are more slavish to the United States than others, but that is a fact. Britain now is a vassal state, to use an accurate formula for it. It is a vassal state. Germany and Japan are tributary states. And we could go through the whole palaver. So it's not totally surprising that they do what they do. What is, of course, deeply disturbing and disgusting is that they talk about punishing, using this crisis to punish working people and young people in this country, and at the same time justifying huge military expenditures when they go abroad to fight America's wars. And it doesn't make sense. Okay, the first two questions on Libya. Gaddafi is slightly crazy, there's no doubt about that. But there seems to be a method behind the madness. He has managed to hang on to power. And I'm told that the bookies in Las Vegas are currently offering odds that he will survive Obama. No, I'm not kidding. The odds if you want to get good odds at the moment, will Obama go first or Gaddafi? They're offering very good odds on Gaddafi. Who do we support? None of them. Sometimes we have to do that. Say we can't support either side, because both sides have no interests at all in the development of Libya or the future of the Libyan people. I've been to this country too, and I was shocked by the appalling level of healthcare and education in a country where there is a huge amount of oil wealth generated. Quite deliberately, the regime has refused to educate its people or provide health care for them. Tunisia was even better than that, than Gaddafi on these questions. So it's time this regime went, but not in this way, because in this way what you will basically have is another occupied country in the Arab world, economically and probably militarily. Because these great leaders of the people, most of whom, not all of whom, current leaders of the opposition are rogues. And we know who they are. And they can't stay in power for long without the backing of the West. Underneath it all, the popular movement is being crushed by both sides. So it's a horrific position for them and for those of us who watch them. As to what would have happened in Benghazi without NATO intervention, the honest answer is, I don't know. And none of us know. Maybe, let's discuss a few possibilities. Maybe the Libyan soldiers sent in to crush Benghazi would have listened to the people on the streets, and maybe they would have split. Maybe some of them would have turned their guns on those ordering them, as has happened in parts of the Arab world. And maybe they would have said, we're not going to fight. But that didn't happen. Instead, most of these soldiers were killed by NATO bombs in a turkey shoot while they were sleeping at night in their tents, bombed into extinction. Now, those who support the NATO intervention in Libya and saying it prevented a massacre in Benghazi, my response is it created another massacre of ordinary Libyans forced to serve inside an army, in many cases against their will. Why privilege one against the other? And I don't like astrologers who look up and say there's going to be a massacre. This is what they said in Kosovo, in the former Yugoslavia. In fact, even the high number of 2,500 plus people who died in Kosovo died after NATO started bombing. That's just a fact. So I think it's a good principle to adopt, not 100% applicable, but at least 99.8% applicable, that when the West decides to intervene in a country, it is not for good motives. To what degree is US involvement in Libya a preface to military action against Iran? Look, I've been arguing at Marxism for the last 4 years now, when this question was first posed, that I think it is very unlikely that there will be a US assault on Iran. And I explained and gave reasons year after year. And I think the fact that it's not happened has tended to vindicate my analysis and what I have been suggesting to you for 4 years. It is not easy for the Americans to get involved in another huge war. And the Pentagon is not done. They know that. That attacking Iran is not going to be like attacking Iraq, whose army was depleted, which didn't even have enough weaponry despite all this crap of weapons of mass destruction. It was easy to defeat Afghanistan because the Pakistanis ensured that the Taliban didn't fight. They said, don't fight now, come home, go home, shave off your beards, just stay calm, just don't fight. So they walked into Kabul. Iran is a totally different country. You know, whatever one may think of the regime, this is a country with an army which is twice the size of the Iraqi army, with all the modern weaponry it can find, with the latest anti-aircraft equipment, which knocks down American planes bought from the Russians. The one thing the Russians carried on was arms research and arms production, and their anti-aircraft weaponry is superior to that of the United States. They have all this, and their nuclear research centers are dotted all over the country. They're not conveniently situated all in one compound. So that to attack Iran means a large-scale war. And the Iranians have said, and it makes sense, that you attack us and we will fight you on 3 fronts. The truce in Iraq is over. The truce in Afghanistan with us is over. And sometimes, in a more angry mood, they say we can open up a new front on the Lebanese-Israeli frontier too. You want to fight us there as well? And it's not complete. It may be, a lot of this might be bluster, but the Americans can't afford to take the risk. The big pressure on invading Iran doesn't come from any serious social force in the United States. It comes from Israel. They're the ones who want Iran bombed because they're scared that their nuclear monopoly in the region might be broken. The fact that the second flotilla has been stopped by the Greek authorities, you've just heard this, I didn't know this, it is extremely bad news. And it's something actually which the Greek governments have not done in the past, because in Greece, which is not a Muslim country, as you all know, there has been a lot of support for Palestine historically. And not just on the left, from almost from Greek society as a whole. They feel that it's what has been happening there is unjust, and they've given it a lot of support. So I think the fact that the Greek government has stopped this flotilla from going will isolate them even more from their own people, and is a clear sign that, you know, he who pays the piper calls the tune. As Britain has learned. Britain has learned it sort of happily, with its people semi-indifferent, but in Greece, the result of this, I think people will object to this quite strongly. On Palestine, my position was for a long time, one, that there should be 2 equal states. That the Palestinians should have a state which is not divided, which is not a bunch of Bantustans, but a proper state. That is now impossible. I don't see any possibility of it. And the sort of worst version of that, if you like, was a retreat to the 67 frontiers, which everyone now thinks is great, but it's not equality. But even that, a return to the 67 frontiers, is impossible, as the Israelis have made it clear time and time again. Side by side with this complete ethnicization of Israeli society, you have a situation inside Israel where attacks on Palestinian Israelis, that is, Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, are on the increase. Discrimination is on the increase. The foreign minister of Israel, Lieberman, openly calls for all the Palestinian Arabs to be expelled from the country. In other words, open defense of ethnic cleansing. And the Europeans are still blackmailed by memories of the Holocaust, which is used totally cynically by the Zionist establishment, as we know. So given all this, I feel that the only solution to the conflict, ultimately, you know, when you say this, people say, oh, but it can't happen. It can't happen today, I know that. But the only solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, ultimately, let's hope by the end of the century at least, is a single state with equal rights for Jews, Christians, Muslims, and that is not only good for the Palestinians, even though many of them don't realize it, in the long term it is also good for the Jewish population of that region. And sometimes I'm asked, because I've written this whole set of novels, historical novels about clashes between Islamic civilization and Western Christendom. And once I was asked in the United States, actually, in Wisconsin, is there anywhere in the world where you can see where Al-Andalus, the three-culture society in Spain, could be recreated in the world? And I said, yeah, I can see it in Israel-Palestine. But I said this time, in the case of Europe, the Catholic Church didn't agree, and in the case of Israel-Palestine, it's the Zionists who don't agree. But it can be created, and it's the only serious alternative. Lastly, the answer to my friend from Cambridge, who is also from Saudi Arabia. The evidence is very clear. You only have to talk to Egyptians of differing political hues. You have to read the American press closely. There is no doubt, just as I first said about 10 years ago, no, 7 years ago, that the United States were engaged in private talks with the insurgents in Afghanistan. People said, where's the evidence? I said, evidence of this sort is not published. Some of it has now come out in WikiLeaks. And evidence of this sort is not made public, and for obvious reasons. It's not even a huge conspiracy. When you're engaged in negotiations with people you regarded as your enemy, both sides don't want it to come out. But it's very clear that just without the Muslim Brotherhood, the United States is not going to be able to sort out the deals it's trying to make. It's not going to go on an offensive and use the Egyptian army to crush the Brotherhood. And as you probably should know, the Brotherhood is divided. There are debates within its ranks. And some of the younger members of the Brotherhood are challenging the elders who dominated policy for a long time. That is healthy, I think, that there is a debate within the Brotherhood, that it isn't a doctrine organization. So, will it follow neoliberal financial model? Look, some will probably oppose it. I think a majority of the leadership will go along with it. Because even though in opposition, one of the things they do to show the weaknesses of the existing state, I remember I was in Cairo many years ago and had a discussion with one of the leaders of the Brotherhood, who was a doctor. And he was very blunt with me. He said, we know who you are, you don't agree with us, we don't agree with you, but let me tell you one thing. If people abroad think that the way we gather support is by constantly forcing people to learn and recite the Quran, how could you become a political movement if you do that? He said, we go into the communities, and he said the largest union in Egypt we control is the doctors' trade union. And our doctors go into the poorest areas with clinics and provide what the state refuses to provide, because it's gone back on that. Now, some of these people will strongly favor massive state spending to create a proper education system, especially the doctors. I think they will. Whether the whole Muslim Brotherhood leadership can be won to that, I personally doubt very much, but we will see. Maybe you're right and I'm wrong. Perfectly possible. But that is my opinion at the moment. Of more interest in a curious way is something I didn't mention in my talk, which is that it's noticeable that all the countries where you've had big mass movements and where despots have been toppled are actually republics, whereas the monarchies, some of the worst regimes of that country, still hang on to power via repression, including, of course, the Saudis, who have virtually nil public consent and support for what they do, but who, since the British Empire during the First World War, have essentially been sustained and kept in power by the United States. And when people say what would happen if there was a mass uprising in Saudi Arabia, I think this is one case where the Americans would intervene, either directly or via NATO or some other auxiliary, to make sure that the Saudi monarchy doesn't fall. That is one of their big fears, that if they lose that country, they really have had it. And the two countries in the region which are desperate to keep sure that the status quo in Saudi Arabia doesn't change are, of course, the United States and Israel.
What more can we do to support the Bahraini uprising? The triumph of the revolution means end to Saudi-US imperialist control. Second question from Joe Brew. I feel that Obama has tried to do progressive things where he can, and that he has helped to enable the Arab Spring. What do you think of Obama's influence? And third and final question from Simon Fairs from Birmingham. In the context of the Arab revolutions, what do you think are the prospects of building a revolutionary movement in Britain and across Europe, and how should we build and organise on the spirit of the Arab Spring?
Let me take the question on Obama first. I've cited chapter and verse in my book on Obama on how he has not helped the Arab Spring. You have to judge everyone, not just politicians, but everyone, not on the basis of what they say, but on the basis of what they do. And in return, and that applies to Obama. When I first wrote this book, I was attacked by liberals in the United States who really didn't like it. Now you can't open an American newspaper to find columnists going on. Oh, Obama has let us down. Oh, Obama has done this. Well, why are you totally surprised? He promised to escalate the war in Pakistan, and he did. There have been more drone attacks killing thousands of innocents in Pakistan under Obama than there were under 2 terms of Bush. The attacks on civil liberties in the United States are much, much greater now. Believe it or not, Obama has released fewer people from Guantanamo than Bush. Whistleblowers are being arrested, picked up every day and charged. There's a huge opposition to this. It's not public, but it's becoming people, his own supporters, are becoming increasingly angry. Let me give you a concrete example. What did he do when the Egyptian thing erupted? Who did he send as the special White House envoy to deal with Mubarak? A former US ambassador to Cairo, who had retired and was now a senior executive in the public relations company in the United States, which had an official contract from the Mubarak regime. This guy is sent to negotiate with Mubarak. He arrives in Cairo. and he meets Mubarak and he gives a statement and he tells the press, well, obviously I've advised the president here to stay in power. Then they had to withdraw him because it was too embarrassing. So they tried to hang on to these people. What has Obama said on Saudi Arabia? Zilch. What has Hillary Clinton said on Saudi Arabia? Please, Your Majesty, perhaps women should be allowed to drive cars. As if driving cars is going to bring democracy to Saudi Arabia. I mean, of course women should be allowed to do that, but they should be allowed to do a lot more, including vote. What more can we do to support the Bahraini uprising? Well, you know, it's difficult always to do too much from abroad, but one of the things I think which would be good, if it was organized at least once a week, is a regular presence outside the Saudi Arabian embassy in London. Even if there are initially 12, 20, 24 people with banners outside the Saudi embassy saying, get your troops out of Bahrain. You know, to show people that we know what's going on and following it. And of course, the Bahraini movement is calling for other forms of aid, which you can check up on websites and do, but you know, those of us who live here can do something like that. This is not unimportant, because these days, if you were seen to be doing that, it goes on the web, it travels to Bahrain, it's seen by people, they feel we're not isolated and we're not alone. As to the last question about the Arab revolutions and building a revolutionary movement in Britain, across Europe, etc., etc., this is all very well, but I think we are at a point, as I stressed in my speech today, to build a movement on the left of the traditional parties that occupy most, if not all, the political space in Parliament, representative political parties. In Britain, we have not been able to build a movement with the partial exception and short-lived exception of Respect, which challenged these parties and actually got someone into Parliament to fight. We have not been able to do that. And I'm not saying by this that Parliament is the main arena for fighting. It isn't, but it's a useful arena to be represented and speak up on behalf of people who are denied a voice in the media and in everyday discourse in this country. Changes are happening in Britain, not necessarily in the direction we would like. Though I have to say that the victory of the SNP in Scotland was a way in which the Scottish people decided to vote New Labour away. I mean, you know, that is a start, and we shouldn't underestimate that. And many of the SNP leaders fought what we could today describe as a traditional social democratic campaign, saying that Scotland doesn't want to go down the same road as England in terms of privatizing health and education, and our system, our legal system is better. So they've at least done something, which is an important step forward, I think. But here there is still this obsession with Labour as a party of opposition. And something, quite honestly, you'd have thought that the Blair experience would have wiped out. Yet you run into quite intelligent people who say, no, well, you know, now that there's a coalition government in this country, we have to support Labour, forgetting the fact that Labour could just as well be sitting inside that coalition.
Oh, yeah, easily.
I mean, it's former Labour ministers who are drafting quite a lot of these bills for the Tories. And Blair's initial remarks were very supportive of Cameron, until the party bureaucracy pleaded and saying, don't be so public, of course we know what you mean. We all know what they mean. What is the difference in actual policies carried out? None. The difference is in the social base. And the social base of Labour still remains the trade unions. That's not unimportant. But I think pressure has been to be put on the trade unions to say how long is this going to carry on when you have the beginnings of the struggle against the Conservative coalition, the Conservative-led coalition, and the leader of the Labour Party is too weak to even support the teachers when they're coming out to defend their pensions. So I think we have to move outwards, build alliances, get into the habit of working with other people, including people we may not agree with on every single thing under the sun. That's always the way to move forward, to build political movements and to build political parties, and that is the lesson we have to learn. On the other hand, we do need politics, and we do need political parties, and we do need political organizations. You can't jump over that stage, because if you try and do it, the existing political parties always capture that space. That is also the lesson that we are seeing from the upheavals in the Arab world and the upheavals taking place in Europe today. Thanks.